The Quran. It is one of the most influential books of all time. A sacred text that over 1 billion people live by.
It's a rule book about how to live one's life.
And yet it holds untold mysteries.
It has the ability to provoke many meanings.
You have clearly texts in which God talks about peace and mercy, etc. But you also have texts that deal with violence and warfare.
From the Quran's mystical origins in the desert,
he heard this voice, and the voice said, recite.
To its dire warnings on justice and retribution.
The Quran is not shy about explaining the explicit punishments that people will suffer in hellfire.
What is at the heart of this holy scripture? What are the secrets of the Quran?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Listen to some of the most powerful words in human history.
الحمد لله رب العالمين.
They are the engine driving one of the world's fastest growing religions.
مالك يوم الدين.
Echoed over 1400 years by billions of voices. They are the words of Islam's holy book, the Quran.
Muslims believe that the Quran is something that was revealed by God directly to the Prophet of Islam.
It's not merely what God inspired his prophet to say, or say the history of some important event. It is actually God's own message to the world.
In Arabic, Quran translates as the recitation. The scripture is meant to be spoken aloud. By doing so, Muslims believe they are communicating directly with God.
The Quran, in preserving God's speech, becomes essentially a part of God, and as such, the text itself, the physical words, the pages, and the book itself has this intrinsic sanctity, this intrinsic holiness to it.
Paging through the sacred text, one might first see similarities between the Quran and Jewish and Christian scriptures. Each speaks of one all-powerful God, and they all tell a number of the same stories. But many see the Quran as a book shrouded in mystery. Its verses, long considered some of the most beautiful Arabic ever written, are a labyrinth of language, more poetry than prose. And its layout defies easy understanding. Unlike the Bible, the Quran follows no chronology or narrative. Rather, its 114 chapters, or surahs, are organized mostly according to length, with the longest at the beginning and the shortest at the end.
There's this almost what we would describe in modern times as a kind of stream of consciousness style to it. There's a kind of mysteriousness. The curious reader in reading the text just is left wondering.
It doesn't tell, for example, the history of Muhammad. It doesn't even tell the history of the world. There is reference to the beginning of the world, to God's creation, but you won't find it in the beginning of the Quran. You'll find it somewhere in the middle.
Muslims don't see the Quran as a story. They see it as God's message to his creation, a rudder to steer believers on the right path.
It's a rule book about how to live one's life, about how to define one's morality, how to experience the world and the struggles and the conflicts that the world brings about.
Deciphering the Quran's meaning is no easy feat. There is no governing religious body in Islam, no Vatican to tell believers how to navigate the complicated text. Each person's understanding of the scripture is his own.
As a Muslim, you have to believe what the Quran says. Now, of course, the interpretation of what the Quran says could be different depending on who you listen to.
So what does the Quran really say? And what does it really mean? The binding words that Muslims live by today were revealed at a specific point in history to a given people in a given place. The traditional Muslim account of the Quran begins 1400 years ago on a barren stretch of the Arabian Peninsula. This remote land was home to Bedouin desert nomads and stable tribal settlements. It was an era that Muslims now refer to as Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance.
We might refer to Arabia as a backwater of civilization, compared to the great empires of Byzantium on the one side and the Sassanid Persian Empire on the other side.
In the middle of the desert, surrounded by mountains on all sides, was the town of Mecca, the social, economic, and religious center of Arabia. Mecca was the gathering place for many coexisting strands of religious thought. Some Arabians at the time had adopted the beliefs of Judaism and Christianity, and the stories and doctrines of those faiths were well known throughout the land.
Pre-Islamic Mecca was a city that was teeming with Jews and with Christians. So there was this stew of various Christian thoughts and various Jewish thoughts.
But the religious landscape of 6th century Arabia was dominated by people who believed in a host of gods. Every year, pilgrims flocked to Mecca to worship at the Kaaba, a shrine that had evolved into a pantheon for their myriad deities and idols.
They believed in the existence of God, but God was in a sense far too distant to be connected to the actual everyday activities of human beings. So these idols would be the intermediaries between them and God.
By the mid-6th century, 360 idols were kept in the Kaaba. The yearly pilgrimage to the shrine had huge economic benefits for the tribe that controlled the holy site, the Quraysh.
And all of these guys who are coming through, they have to make some offering. They have to pay some kind of a tax. So it's a very lucrative business.
The Quraysh had amassed a great concentration of wealth. While the leaders grew rich, most Meccans lived in abject poverty.
There was a major problem with regard to issues of economic maldistribution of wealth or economic injustice, issues with regard to the rights of orphans, of women, of the poor.
Slavery was normal practice in Mecca. Baby girls, considered worthless, were often buried at birth. This city of Mecca was the world into which a child named Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born in the year 570 AD. A poor boy who would grow up to become a prophet of one of the world's great religions. To Muslims, it is considered blasphemous to show any visual representation of Muhammad. Little is known of Muhammad's early life, and the accounts that do exist were written over 100 years after his death. Those stories say that by the time Muhammad was 6, both of his parents were dead.
As an orphan in this kind of society which was so highly stratified, he was part of the have-nots. He was part of the group that didn't belong to this landed aristocracy that controlled almost every aspect of the political and social and economic organization of the city.
But Muhammad had the support of a powerful uncle,